The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
John McCoy is a husband, father of 2 sets of twins, and a creative soul with a passion to make a positive impact in the world. With a background in design, John has spent more than 15 years in the nonprofit world, starting as a graphic design intern, then marketer, and ultimately a fundraiser. In 2020, alongside 2 like-minded friends, John jumped his nonprofit job opportunities to create We Are for Good, a media company for social impact leaders. With a goal to disrupt the status quo, create a bigger, more inclusive table for conversations and community, John and his friends also launched a new quarterly virtual and in-person gathering called ImpactUp, with their first gatherings shaking the nonprofit world this last July. John holds a fundamental belief that philanthropy is revolutionary in not just the impact it creates, but what it does to the hearts and the minds of those who pour into their missions. John is the co-host of We Are for Good podcast, which debuted as #1 on Apple Podcasts in the nonprofit category in 2020, and since then has surpassed more than 600,000 downloads. And they're happily growing a community, an audience of nonprofit leaders globally. In our conversation today, it's clear we share so many commonalities. Not only are we both campers, artists, and connectors, but we both believe that anyone can make a positive impact in the world, wherever they live. Welcome everyone to the Connector Next Door, and welcome John to this opportunity to have this conversation. I know you're traveling right now. You're somewhere near the Canadian-ish border, so a little bit closer to us here, but thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me, even if it's virtual this time. Welcome here.
Lisa, you are a light, you're a magnet, and it's such a joy to be in conversation. I was so excited when you reached out. And yes, I can kind of see Canada from just a few paces out, so I'm waving at you. Yeah.
Well, next time you're camping, you'll come up to Banff or Lake Louise, and yes, we'll get you all set up.
It's on the bucket list for sure.
We here at Candy, our focus, really my joy for now, almost 16 years. November is going to be 16 years in the business. I'm a lifelong event planner, and I have had this passion to serve and support those that are planning and promoting their own events. Events can be such a beautiful tool of connection, and it takes not just checking off the boxes, but it really does take us being very intentional on how we are creating connections with each other through projects, with partners. The conversation today, I think where I'd love for this to go is for people to see not just the projects that you're working on, but that passion behind it and how that has started for you. But before we get into all of that, the word connection, the feeling of connection, what is that for you? And could you describe what it means to you?
Oh my gosh, what a good question. And man, we're such kindred spirits. I love that you've created a space for people that love pouring into events, but it's like that next level of connection. Like that was definitely a very much part of my career and experience. And I believe that I've seen that. So connection to me is everything. And you probably hear me say this on LinkedIn because it's just part of how I show up and what I really believe in the world. But community, I say, is everything. And I think connection is absolutely embedded in that too, because each of us need each other. And there's, seasons of life that maybe we don't realize that we don't, necessarily see our value. And a lot of our stories, at least my personal one, is coming into realization that not only do I have immense value, but man, the light that I carry is needed in this world. And so I think connection is about sharing that, sharing our true, authentic selves and being able to show up in that way and to find others in that way, see others in that way. And my belief, I'm very much in the nonprofit space. That's where I built my career. That's where I convene community mostly today, is in social impact and nonprofit. But I believe that that specific sector is asking for us to step into that level of authenticity to solve some of the world's greatest problems too. And that happens by connecting. It happens by
Mm-hmm.
finding partners and finding people that have the same values as you.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is everything. And I don't mean to like miss the question by saying it's everything, but it really is the bedrock, of how we change things and how we move through the world and hard things together. So it's a huge part of my work in my life.
And I love when you're saying about the light within somebody. There is
Mm,
that feeling that there is something from everyone that we can connect with, that
yeah.
we don't have to wait until they've arrived somewhere, or we don't have to wait for them to have a great accomplishment. I think here in North America, and I talk to connectors all over the world, and sometimes we miss the point of in process, or while we're in the journey, or finding space with somebody, sometimes even in the middle of a mess, like where we feel like we don't, if what I'm hearing you say is correct, there's this feeling like um I feel like my life can be so messy. I can feel
Yeah.
like my days, or how, things go down in my day might not be perfect. And is that the time to connect? And is that something that you found for yourself, that when it really could be any time, it could be anyone in any situation. Does that change how you connect? Or does that maybe even deepen how you're connecting with them?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I was drawn to a quote, and I feel like I've looked it up to figure out who said it many years ago, but I bought it at a concert, like one of my most favorite concerts with my wife before, maybe even before we were married. It was a long time ago. And the shirt just said, "Be kind because you don't know the battle someone else is facing," right? And
Mm,
that's just always stuck with me. And especially on the journey now, we may talk about this, but my family's on this winding road trip that we're meeting people across the US right now in different pockets at really random reasons. And I think it is true that, um, what we can do is we can show up with kindness, with believing the best in others. And that's where you start. And if you look at our country, y'all are Canadians, which we love y'all as neighbors, let's be clear. Y'all are so great. But you look at our country from how the media perceives us, and it looks like everyone is at odds with everybody. And it's like there's
mhm,
no common ground. And I just keep coming back to like that is not the world that I see. And I'm in the same world too of going place to place. And it's
mhm,
like more of us are aligned than we realize that we are. And it comes down to core things that we all want to be loved. We all want to support those around us, our families, take care of them, be good to them, and to like help each other. And I think there's that common ground that you just come into relationships from that perspective. And it's like, man, we all have a connecting force. We all have something
mhm.
in common. And I love that you are riffing on that. We all have something so important to add to the world because whoever's listening, I hope you hear that and believe that because it really is needed in the world.
Hmm. And the idea of calling it out in each other,
Oof, that's good.
because we sometimes forget.
Yeah, I mean, because you don't understand the power of just like speaking over somebody, what that can do. And I saw it in a conversation I had today, like just encouraging people in what you see is a superpower moment because it's so hard to see it in ourselves, but it's so natural to
Mm,
see it in other people. But
mhm,
I think back to Maya Angelou's quote, that comes to mind of just like people remember how you make them feel. And I feel like that is so true that even if we forget the specific thing they said, you know that you felt cared for, that you felt seen, that you felt like you
mm,
could show up as yourself. It's been like a way that we have grown the movement that we're part of with We Are for Good. That if you just create and hold space for people and come at it from an authentic place, not as like a business building, but as a, like, I actually care about who you are and what your story is, it does compound over a long period of time of that you can have really great connections in those moments, by showing shared values, showing care for the other person. So it's a superpower. And I feel like we don't talk about it because it's like a soft skill. It's like,
yeah.
no, we're going to go to school and learn all the hard stuff, but we don't talk about the whatever soft skills that we need in our daily life just for connection. So this is really
Well,
good.
I think when you were posting about an event that you had done this summer, and
Yeah.
um and and the celebration of the different gatherings around the world. So maybe we can talk a little
Mm,
bit about how all of this and who you are is manifesting through this movement you're creating. But the photos that you were posting with different
mhm.
people in different cities and different regions that had adopted what you were putting out there,
Yeah.
and celebrating whatever the combination, the diversity,
Yeah.
whatever their experience was. it was like freeing up that experience to be whatever it needed to be for that group. And that was
Mm,
just a really beautiful, from the outside, just such a beautiful example of how connection doesn't have to be like over
so
controlled. And
prescriptive.
yeah,
Mm.
exactly. So tell us a little bit about where you're at. What is it that you're creating, and how do you see it actually all growing and morphing and changing right now into
Yeah.
something beautiful?
Thank you for asking. I mean, my co-founder and I, we worked together in the nonprofit space for 20 plus years. She was my boss. I was her intern, but we became friends and have carried along this journey. And we just have seen the world a little bit differently. We believe that philanthropy in itself is like revolutionary and not just the impact, but like what it does in the heart of the giver. And I almost answered your first question because it came to mind of that connections love in a lot of ways. It's showing love to other people. But philanthropy at its core, that word just means love, like giving love
Mm,
to another person. And so we've translated that to be only about money in the US at least. We talk about philanthropy, you're given these big checks. But our thesis is that an impact uprising is like we can change the world if everyone pulls more into philanthropy in their own life. And yeah, that may mean giving more, but it also means like taking care of your community more and plugging in with wherever you feel called, compelled to do that. So it's like we call it an impact uprising. It's this movement of people that we want to, lean into doing more good in the world. Well, that's been our vision since we launched this. We started with the podcast, which kind of gathered a community. And, 3.5 years in, we just turned four this last week.
mm,
But we started to conversate of like, we love talking, we love meeting people. But what if we started to use those conversations to like really like change the trajectory? What if we all got aligned and had the same conversation on one day? So instead of meeting asynchronously, like whenever you want to listen to my podcast, what if we all gathered on one day and talked about one topic to see if we could kind of shift together at the same time? And so the idea was for Impact Up, is what we called it. It was on July 11th this summer. And we all convened virtually in the morning. And so for all you virtual event planners, I'm giving you a high five and a hug. Like there's so many details, right, to get all this dialed in. But it was called Impact Uprising. We gathered for a few hours in the morning to talk about power. Like the whole theme was about power. How does it influence
mm,
our work? How's it holding us back? How is it maybe keeping us small? Or how can we share power if maybe we have power? And so that night, our challenge to our community was, would you gather locally? And so, of course, we started with our closest believers in the movement and we asked them, hey, would you want to host in your city? We are hoping to get 15 cities. And friend, 29 cities opened up. So we were kind of like taken aback from Sydney, Australia to Jinja, Uganda to Toronto to 20 places across the US, all decided to host these gatherings. And, I would get on with them. And we were very emotional too, because we were taken aback at the joy of this group that wanted to meet. And I
mm.
kept saying, like, this is like our hope for this, but I want you to take it and make it your own. Because if we tried to go make an event in Toronto, I would not pronounce process correctly, right? I'd probably say process in front of all you guys or whatever. But like, I don't know what the community of Toronto needs. And I think the
Mm,
beauty of this movement was to
mm,
say, your community. What if you took this concept into your town and make it something unique and special? And so we had people interpret that in lots of different ways, and I think that was the beautiful thing to see it manifested was just like we had a shared goal, we had shared values, but all of us did the assignment in a different way, but we were kind of cheering for each other virtually around the world. So in all is maybe 1,000 people gathered in 29 locations, and we're going to do it again on October 10th. So stay tuned for more, but
uh,
it was a very moving time for us team too, to just realize, wow, this is the power of community and connection, honestly,
mm.
at scale.
And to understand too that it didn't happen overnight, that you had a passion for this early on. You were having many, many conversations, and then to bring people into a space where they're now available to each other. There is just a real gift, I think, in that, where we're able to understand more so just what the core is. Like what are we discussing? So there was a theme, power, but then there
Mhm.
also was a core of an uprising, which is such a, we think of that sometimes in a negative sense. And honestly, and I have to say this, and whatever, I love to hear your thoughts on it, but I've really struggled with the word impact. But I was in this conference, 300 people, we're talking about impact, how are we, and lots of nonprofits in the room. And I stood up at the end and I said, I think I may have to rethink the word impact. No one quite knows what to do with a
They're
comment
like,
like
Lisa,
that
get
because
off stage. Yeah.
but it was just that feeling like almost like something's coming out of the air and it's impacting the earth and nobody has any say about it and it just kind of blows everything up and everyone's just now kind of wandering around figuring out what do we do? What's
Mm,
just happened? And over the years, that was several years ago, and now over the years, just understanding that we're all having an impact, whether we think we are or not,
so
but
true.
to own it and to say that there is an impact uprising, so impact up, is
Hmm.
giving us permission to say, it's not going to be, like you said, sort of that prescriptive, this is the formula, this is how you do it. And we're going to go into every city and make this thing happen,
Right. Copy
however,
paste.
yeah.
Yeah.
But to open that up to people's interpretation of that, and that, like you just explained so beautifully, where they're able to add their own life and light to that in a way that will speak to their community. And now to have a place where they can have these really meaningful conversations around like something like power. um, I can imagine that the impact that they're having now, even post event and leading up to this October event, I'm really interested now how you're kind of moving from July to what that will look like in October. Have you received any kind of feedback from the people that participated and what was their experience on the ground?
Yes. I mean, there's been across the gamut. We did a
Mm.
debrief, a formal debrief, and then we did like an anonymous survey. And we're like, please tell us if we have broccoli in our teeth. Because I think when you create something that has all these tentacles, and I keep picturing, I'm such like a visual oriented person, but I just
Mm.
picture that we brought this idea with open hands and knowingly that it's going to take shape in a lot of different ways. Like the nucleus hopefully is carried through that if you come, there's threads of the experience that we would hope were there. And we did that through some community guidelines and some like guiding docs of like, this is a safe place. We're going to be kind in how we share and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, but the feedback was all over the map. But I will say, so I'll lift a couple things. The biggest thing was people really loved just connecting and being together. Like,
Mhm.
and it's interesting that it took, like more of a bigger perspective for us to say, hey, get together in town. Like they're already in town together. It's almost like we needed permission to meet up with
Yeah.
people that we knew online.
Yeah.
But that's a superpower. I think that was a takeaway. Everybody loved the new connections out of it. Let me share a little bit. I happened to be in San Francisco. My family was driving, on the West Coast at the time, and we, planned to be at Impact Up in San Francisco, which was awesome because it was being hosted by a really incredible human there in San Francisco. And she had partnered with a local nonprofit. We were meeting at the nonprofit's office. Like it was so like authentic. It wasn't some flashy event.
Uh-huh.
It was us pulling up office chairs in a circle to talk about power. Yeah,
Mm.
in the evening at this nonprofit Habitat for Humanity there in San Francisco. And I looked around the room and it just like gut punched me because I realized that this was happening and I did not need to be there. Like I was so happy to be there and I
Mm.
loved getting to meet everybody that was there, but I realized like I didn't need to be here. Like this was happening because people are pouring in to make this happen. And I think that
Mm.
was a big lesson for me that that's the type of movement that we want to create. And we try to like tamp down, like it's not ego. We're not trying to build the biggest like platform for us, me and my co-founder Becky, but it's like, how can we just build a platform where this is where people come and they connect, they feel more confident, they find new partners, all those kind of things. And that's to me like where the magic is like, man, we need to keep it simple like that. So as we're planning, we're like, we all get into all the details of venues and again expenses and things when it got too hard, but I'm like what I saw was, man, the lowest common denominator, grab some office chairs, pull them in a circle, and people, we were crying, we were hugging. We were like, this is what it's all about. It wasn't about
Mm.
the fancy empanadas that they had in New York, which I heard were really great because they had a really bougie event. But I'm like, it's about creating the safe place for connection. And from that day, friendships have emerged, partnerships are kind of coming together. I see organizations now talking and working together that hadn't known each other before that. And it's like, this is cool. Like we could keep doing this.
Mm.
And so that's the intent moving forward is like keeping it simple, keeping it a very small, easy to run kit so it can be replicated but just
Hmm.
let it be what it's going to be on some level too.
Yeah. And don't we all want that ability to breathe? Like
Yes.
just to let it organically grow into what it could be. And when we
Mhm.
loose the control a little bit and the results, like clearly you have a direction you want this to go. And we need that, as far as leadership in the space is really important. But part of leadership is also knowing when to say, hey, I might
Yeah.
just be able to go for dinner with my family, and maybe it's best for you to have this conversation, or being part
Mhm.
of a conversation where there is an even playing field, where it's not
Mhm.
just somebody that is taking necessarily that leadership role. You probably have read the book, The Power of Giving Away Power. Have you heard of
Ooh,
that?
I haven't. I'm
Oh,
writing it
so
down.
good. It
So good.
really was one of those books that really helped me articulate some of my own feelings around hierarchy and power. And in events, in many ways, some planners feel maybe powerless to change
Mhm.
things, but
Mhm.
the key and the goal is that we're learning how to connect the dots, and we're
Mm,
creating something far bigger than ourselves. And
that's
when you start
beautiful.
to see the dots almost in retrospect, like if you look back on July and you say, yeah, maybe, some things could have been done differently or whatever. We all are in that space.
Yes.
But when you see the bigger picture of it, how it really gives us that hope of the power of community, the power of coming
Mm.
together, and what we're creating together is different than what any one person or any one leader could be creating. Is this something that you felt like, even when you were younger, from where you were back then to where you are now, do you see some of the ties between who you were as a kid and then how that's kind of folded into who you are today?
Oh my gosh, such a cool question to think through. I mean, I think of myself drawing what do I want to be when I grow up as this little artist wearing a beret standing at his easel. So I'm like, any day that I can just do art, like I'm a happy person too.
Cool.
But I mean, there's some formative times like in my career that I think planted seeds to what this is now because I certainly created what we're doing today. We Are for Good to be what I wanted to see in the world as a nonprofit person because I would
Mm,
define that my years there, I was went from a graphic design intern to a marketer to a fundraiser, and that's where I landed as I was in fundraising for a long time. And I would feel like I was on an island. You know, you talk about
mm,
like connection, community. I would go to like these bigger conferences and truly still feel like I don't belong here. You know, like people have all these credentials or they've been in the field, and I'm like, I feel like I'm an artist, disguised as a marketer, disguised as a fundraiser over here. And all these people got their lives together, you know. So I will say that's one seed truly of like, how do we create professional development that's like, there's an ease. Everyone's welcome. Everyone actually has something
Mhm,
to offer. It's not just the person on stage, by the way. It's actually, you should maybe listen to who is out there in the audience that has something to bring. And
mhm,
because we all have value, going back to that thread. And then, secondly, a real formative time because it happened over 10 years. Really, it was my second big job, but it was a time that I had my first career at Oklahoma State University Foundation. And I was doing marketing mostly there. And I decided to follow my friend Becky to this new role in Oklahoma City at a healthcare foundation. I knew nothing about healthcare, right? I mean, I'm like, I've been to the hospital because I broke my arm in second grade about healthcare. And we had been there maybe 3 weeks. I'm sure this translates to Canada, but Garth Brooks, the world's largest country music star, right,
uh-huh,
is announces he's suing the hospital over naming rights of something our foundation was connected to. So we go from this very successful university foundation to 3 weeks on the job, and the country music starts suing the hospital. And I'm like, why are we here? Because
oh boy.
as you know, like the PR, to get stuck in the spin cycle on the negative side, it just feels like, how are we going to dig out? How can we convince our community that this community hospital needs your support despite Garth's disapproval, over here?
Mm,
But that was, probably 13 or 14 years ago now. He, that was a moment that we came together and were like, to start a movement, like we all kind of lost belief in like why somebody would support this place. But what if we started from within? And I thought about what's my personal passion. And, we don't have to go into this. It's so personal probably for this, but my wife and I were going through fertility treatments at the hospital, which ultimately led to us having twins. And now we have two sets of twins, which is a whole different story. But it was very front and center of life that my passion at that time, I was so grateful for the care that we received and the NICU that held our babies. So it was very natural for me to talk about why I'm so passionate about this hospital. It literally gave us the family that we dreamed of, in a lot of ways. And
Mm,
so as we're trying to figure this out, I'll try to connect my random threads that I've shared with you here to say, when we're trying to build belief at this hospital, we started from within to say, how could our employees be the nurturer of this movement? Because the outside of the walls doesn't understand why we're even a nonprofit. What if we started this campaign and it became an employee giving campaign? It's called You and I. It's still around today, but it was about finding your passion, sharing your story. It wasn't about money. It was about the connection. And it's literally the seeds that became We Are for Good today. That campaign now,
mm,
raises like almost $1 million a year because of people's personal investment in this. And so we took the tenets of what works there: storytelling, everyone matters, everyone's story matters, believers are more important than donors. And we baked that into what this movement is today. And it's like the same idea of like, man, giving people platform and giving them agency and showing that we all have something of value to add really does scale. It does, it's evergreen, and it doesn't have to apply just to fundraising. It applies to how we want to show up in the world. And
mm,
so I feel like those were two different formative moments that I see now. And it's like you flash forward to sitting in the floor there in San Francisco, looking around the room and being like, it's the same storyline, of like creating a
mm,
safe place where people feel that they can share what they're passionate about, they can get connected, and they feel like they are making the world a better place together. So it definitely is compounded over time, and
mhm.
just feel very grateful, to get to see it and be part of that.
And even in your travels now, when you were talking about sort of the random connections that you're making
Yeah.
now, and just how you're seeing the beauty in even those. And we sometimes don't know where those moments, like that 3 weeks in, and you're not sure, and you're reconnecting with your own story, and then you're allowing people and employees to tell their stories. I would guess
Mm,
that many of those people may not have felt their story was worthwhile to tell.
mm, yeah,
And
I think
just
you're right.
even the belief that somebody thinks it's valuable, somebody feels like my experience of the world is worth saying or worth, sharing in a circle, even.
Yeah.
So many of us, the whole idea of being seen and heard, and I add considered in that, because as we're curious about in a conversation, we're also considering, I wonder if that's something that maybe I need to look at for myself, or
Yeah.
that could be added to a project. And when we talk about even event planning teams, so those people that are listening today, and you're thinking about how does this apply in your own situation with your own teams, and starting from the inside,
Hmm.
we often look at how we're perceived from the outside, and we measure ourselves by what people are saying about us, and how many people are liking what we put out on social media, or even what the board report says. We put ourselves in that position where we're being evaluated all the time, and it's
Mm,
hard for us to say there is value in those smaller connections, in those conversations. And you're living proof of that, that when you started to look inside or started to look internally for those stories, that it allowed you maybe to expand what was possible even through the hospital. You talk about a
yeah.
million dollars a year um, consistently.
Right. Like an
that
annual. Yeah.
that creates an expectation of maybe new programming, new opportunities, better support for people.
Yeah.
When you think of the movement that you've created now, and I say this in the most honoring and beautiful way possible, but that you're most proud of, that you just feel like
Mhm.
if my kids would wake up one day and understand what I do, because I know that they're probably living their lives and doing their
They have no,
thing,
yeah.
what would you feel most proud of to tell them someday?
You know, um, Goodness. Hey, Lisa, you're such a good question asker. I would want them to see that I'm proud that literally I had the courage to do it,
Mm,
because there was some real seminal moments. It would have been really easy not to do it. And I look back and, I think some people call them like sliding door moments in life. And there was a time right before we jumped our jobs, the global pandemic showed up on our doorstep. It was 2020. I had written I'm a planner, but I'm also like a big vision guy. I could just sit around and talk about vision all day, but I realize we got to get things done. So I come back to our planning. So I'd written a really geeky 30-page business plan. Your accounting husband would love it. It like made all sense, all of these things. And it came down to the time of year that we're like, okay, I'm gonna jump by summer and wake up in March and the global pandemic had like taken over our life, right? And in fundraising, everyone kind of stalled out. They're like, what do we do?
Mhm.
Personally, I'm like, the world is shutting down. Am I really going to uproot? My wife stays at home with our children. Am I going to put our life on the line to say, is this going to work? Is this dream worth it?
Yeah.
And at the same exact moment, I had two phone calls happen. One was an invitation to go be a new like head of development at a local healthcare foundation. And second one was my dream charity calling with a job opportunity. And I'm like, I feel like if the stars could be more aligned in that moment to be like, do you want to, go over here to, be the new guy in town to get this great job over here to do the same thing? Or do you place a bet on yourself, And it's
Mhm.
like, I got to give my wife a lot of credit, which is, again, connection, like who around you sees and believes in you that you need in your circle, whether that's your partner, your spouse, or it's a friend, or find that person. If they're on LinkedIn, if you're looking for somebody, like find your person on LinkedIn that can champion you or text you. But Candace took me by the shoulders one day and she literally looked me in the eye and she's like, when are you going to quit giving up on your dream?
Mm.
And it's like, I needed that moment to like place the bet on myself to say, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to say no to all these other things and we're going to go all in here. And I just think if I wouldn't have had community, and Candace is part of it, but there's also friends and layers of people that I needed that affirmation. I don't know that I would have done it because my natural bent would have been, this is easier. I like those people. I'm going to go work with them. It's more money, it's more security. I may have just, sold out on that. And so I hope my kids can see that, and that we're trying to live out the value of like trying to step into courage more in our life and know that that's okay. So
Oof.
that's one piece.
That's a big piece. And I think that that was one of those moments where I thought, even though you and I had never talked, I thought we are probably kindred spirits. You
Yeah.
did a post on LinkedIn about the
I
risk
feel that.
that you took, and just to feel that with you, that we don't know where it necessarily is going to go, and we're not going to know all the steps to get us where we ideally would love to be. What your post was sharing with the world was it's the action of, it's the step
Mm-hmm.
forward to do something. You were putting everything on the line,
Mm-hmm.
and it's your passion, it's what you can see possible in the world. It's the potential you see in others. What you've put out in the world, and what your children will see will not just be you, but it's going to be lots of incremental changes with different people woven into what you've created. Really, really looking forward to continuing this conversation with you and seeing where we can collaborate and find ways,
Absolutely.
those intersection points, or maybe, looking at the stars and just saying, how can we connect the dots and find ways to work together. So
And we're
thank
both
you.
campers, so we're both
And we're
spending
both
time looking at the
campers.
stars and
Ah,
thinking
yeah,
about
I've
life.
gotcha. In this context, with the people that are listening today, and they
Yeah.
are working really hard behind the scenes, many, many of them. I work with individuals that are planning events as coaches or speakers, but also
Mhm.
in nonprofits. They're doing fundraisers, they're coming together as community, building team building or volunteer building kind of
I love it.
events. What is it for them when they think, well, a movement is something that is just not for me? I am just on my treadmill. I'm getting things done. But when you talk about where you were, and taking that leap and finding a space where you're creating something new or ways for people to connect, I often say events are connection points over time. What would you be able to share with them, maybe just to give them that little bit of light that what they're doing today is still worth it? How could they build on something that they're doing to really give it that impact up, so that they're
Yeah.
looking at it with wider eyes, bigger plans, and maybe even bringing others into the mix?
I
Something
love
that
this
you
audience.
share.
I mean, you can feel me giving you a huge virtual high five if you're listening because I love this space so much that creating experiences is such like a breakthrough way to get people to feel something. Like I mean, I think so much of our world is scrolling and whatever, and we're moving so fast, and it's in the middle of the attention economy, right? Where there's like information is no longer scarce. But what is scarce is that connection, like that truly breakthrough connection that you feel. And we have a saying on our podcast. We say it kind of everywhere we go, but it's like an event is not just an event. A campaign is not just a campaign. It's like it's this gateway to so much more. And I think if you can connect it beyond the tactics, what are
Mm.
we really trying to do? What is this part of a journey that may start this night, or maybe it's a connected thread for someone who's encountering you again? I think you got to get connected to the bigger purpose, because if you do, we all start feeling like we can pull in the same direction, and it's easier to stay in the game, to realize that it's part of a bigger play together. So
Mm.
I just think I look at like events, like how they have shaped my experiences too. And I have to share like a moment at an event that I think changed me, and like the power of just creating the space, creating the ambiance, dimming the lights at the right time, having the right person there. I was part of the team. So like my team at the Healthcare Foundation put on our annual gala. So I feel you. Shibari chairs, gotcha. Committees, picking out linens for days, all that stuff. I was in that world. Like I totally I would wear a headset at the back trying to call the shots until we finally hired an actual producer, which was a really great idea. But I mean, we were scrappy for a lot of years. But this particular year, we were benefiting our cancer area of our hospital. And it was kind of uncomfortably late, close to the program. We'd already set the program schedule, but something just felt, that like in your gut, you feel like when something's just not quite clicking, and that, okay, I think all of this feels good, but it feels like we're missing something in this story. Well, at the same time, this really incredible 28-ish-year-old cancer patient shows up basically at our foundation office. She'd called in because she had gotten this terminal diagnosis with pancreatic cancer. Her name was Sarah. She's like one of those people that is so transcendent. She got the diagnosis. She is a huge, incredible person. She had received a scholarship to be able to access integrative care. So, like, kind of yoga and different things like therapeutic to make you feel better, access to wigs and different things like that. And she was like, I want to pay this forward. I want to create a scholarship that could help other cancer patients. I'm like, what 28-year-old terminal patient stops what she's doing? She wasn't from like a well to do family that just wrote a check. It's like she wanted to help raise money for this scholarship. And so that conversation just happened to be going on in our
Mm.
office. And she left that day. And I was like, it was not just me, as our team say, what if Sarah is the missing piece of this gala? Like, I mean, we have a literal platform in less than 60 days. We're trying to identify what is the, moment. I wonder if she'd be open to that. So we invited her. She was more than ecstatic. She's like, I want to raise $5,000. And so she said yes. She came on stage, and this, I'm taking you back to the event that night. I remember her on stage, the lights, the feeling. She stood up in front of this room, probably 700 or 800 people in our community, and she shares her story and says, I want to fund this scholarship. And more than $200,000 was raised in that room that night,
Wow.
you
Just
know?
gives me chills. That's
Yeah, it
amazing.
gives me chills too. And to see her in celebration, in dancing on the stage, and so much joy
Mm.
and so much life, and like something that for her was just like this vision of how to turned into like something tangible that happened not only in her lifetime, in like 60 days from her
Yeah.
speaking it. And so we just got to be in community with her and her family over the coming months. And we lost her a few years back. And I was sitting there at her service, at her memorial service, with several of us from the foundation that got to go that day. And in her even eulogy, they talked about what that moment did for her, what that night meant to her, and what that scholarship means to their family now. And you're like, don't underestimate with these moments that might just
Mm.
be like a 40-page checklist, because I'm sure y'all all got your binders. Like, it's so much more than that. Like, you're creating the conditions for this kind of connection to happen.
Yeah.
And because of your care, because the light wasn't flickering, I was able to hone in and be engaged.
Mm.
Because the music was just right, I was emotionally stirred and paused to listen. And it's like
Hmm.
all those things do matter. And yeah, it's something that'll always stick with me, that I saw the beauty of humanity and like somebody that's taken like the hardest possible thing and bringing light to it, and
Mm.
it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to behold.
And for many of us that get lost in those details, just to put our head up sometimes above the water and just say, what else is going on out here?
Exactly. Besides that, this guy got the chicken instead of the steak. And what,
Oh,
what,
yeah, exactly. That's right. It is so beautiful. And I think in the conversation around what's possible, I think that that's
Mm,
where in community with others, in conversation with others, you were there with your team, she was
yeah.
there sharing a dream of hers. And
Mhm.
if we take a look back and see where things start, I think then it becomes a little less intimidating to start
So
something
true.
new and allowing that to grow organically into a connection point within our events. Thank you for sharing that story. What a gift that is. And not only are we both campers, but we're both artists. And the idea of us really leaning into that creativity, leaning into who we truly are. And artists are ones that maybe you might not identify yourself as an artist out there, but if you're problem solving, if you are out there and you're finding creative solutions, if you're listening, and if
Mm,
you're messing with something in the back office that you're wondering if it might be possible, John, you are one of those people that we can look to and say, there's evidence
yes, you can do it. Oh my gosh,
that there
you can
might
do
be
it.
a possibility that something new could work for you and might lead you into spaces that will allow you with ease and joy and
Mm,
in community with others into spaces where your events will just take on a whole new meaning.
thank you for
Thank
saying that.
you.
Oh my
Yeah, thank
gosh.
you.
Well, what you're stirring up in me, because I was trying to think what post were you referencing earlier, and I wrote the post the week that we were going to announce Impact Up, and on my schedule was tease that Impact Up is coming, and this is what I want to impart on whoever's listening is that we also need more of us, all of us, to be authentic in where we're at, because I was supposed to say, hey, this is going to launch on Friday, but instead I was like, hey, I woke up and my stomach hurt because I'm so scared because it was
Mm,
truthful. And I
mhm,
think it's really easy to like, especially as probably planners that want everything to look perfect. It's like it's okay to show up in certain spaces, obviously where you feel safe. And I realize that it could be very privileged to say I feel very safe to show up at LinkedIn and authentically. But to just say, hey, it's okay to feel like this. I want to normalize that it's scary to do stuff that you don't know the outcome of. And like, I'm just going to put that out there. And like, the reception was so warm that I'm like, either way, this is going to fail because I've got people that believe in this, but it's like, I guess it's somewhat cathartic, but it's also just like being authentic and talking about this stuff could make it easier for other people and to
mhm.
realize. So
Agreed,
happy
agreed.
we're in this together, Lisa. You're awesome.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much
Gosh.
for taking the time. For those that want to connect with you, continue this conversation, be part of Impact Up or
Yeah,
anything
come
else,
on.
listen to your podcast. Where can they
Thank you.
find you? What's the best way to connect?
Yeah, I mean, I do love hanging out on LinkedIn. It's how we met. I've met some of my dearest friends on LinkedIn, which sounds so geeky, but it's so true. Like the power of the DM. Like find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. It's John McCoy. You can find me. I have a really bright blue profile pic, so that's me if there's multiples. But I would love to hear from you, and then I can connect you to everything We Are for Good. The We Are for Good podcast is out there on wherever you're listening to this right now.
Amazing. Well, we're not done the conversation, but for today, we
Sounds
will
good.
say that is it for now.
Yes.
Thank you for all of you for listening and just for giving space to what is possible, that you can
Mm,
create a platform or you can create an event or you can create an opportunity for people to connect in ways that you probably didn't even see coming. And
yeah.
we're here for it. Let us know what you're creating. Can't wait to chat with you all. Thanks again, John, for being with me today.
Such an honor. Thank you, Lisa.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.